The scream that tore through St. Agnes Psychiatric Hospital on my first night wasn't human. It was a jagged, guttural howl that clawed its way up from the basement, slicing through the stale air like a blade. I froze in the middle of a flickering hallway, my sneakers squeaking on the cracked linoleum, my heart slamming against my ribs. It was 11:47 p.m., my first shift as a nurse in this decaying facility buried deep in the Louisiana bayou, and I already knew I'd made a terrible mistake taking this job. My name is Claire Hensley, and I'm no stranger to hospitals. 6 years as a nurse, AR in Baton Rouge, hospice in New Orleans, taught me to handle blood, death, and chaos without blinking. But St. Agnes was different. The ad promised good pay, full benefits, no psych experience needed. I was desperate, fresh off a breakup that left me drowning in debt, so I signed on without digging too deep. The hospital sat on the edge of a swamp, its gray brick walls streaked with moss and neglect, 30 miles from the nearest town down a potholed road that turned to sludge in the rain. Built in the 1920s, it was a dumping ground for society's forgotten, patients transferred from prisons or other asylums, people nobody wanted to claim. The air smelled of bleach and something sour, like milk gone bad in the sun, and the silence was the kind that watched you. I arrived at dusk, the sky bruised purple over the cypress trees, their roots twisting into the murky water like skeletal hands. The parking lot was half empty, just a few rusted cars and a security van. Inside, the lobby was dim, lit by flickering fluorescents that buzzed like dying insects. The head nurse, Marjorie, met me at the front desk. She was in her 60s, with a smoker's rasp and eyes that didn't blink enough, her gray hair pulled into a tight bun. She handed me a clipboard with a single sheet of paper, her fingers cold as they brushed mine. "Follow these rules," she said, her voice flat as the linoleum. "Don't ask why. Just do it." I glanced at the list, expecting standard hospital protocol, med schedules, emergency codes. Instead, it was wrong, like something written by someone who'd seen too much. 10 rules, typed in stark black ink, each stranger than the last. Never look directly at the basement door between midnight and 3 a.m. Do not enter the basement, no matter what you hear. If you hear singing in Ward C, lock yourself in the nearest room and wait until it stops. Always carry your ID badge, even in the bathroom. If you see a shadow move in the reflection of a window, do not turn around. Never leave a patient's door unlocked after 10 p.m. Do not let patient 17 touch you under any circumstances. If the lights flicker 3 times in a row, leave the room immediately. Do not eat or drink anything left unattended in the break room. If you hear your name called from an empty room, walk away and do not respond. I laughed, a nervous hiccup, thinking it was some hazing ritual for new hires. Marjorie's face didn't crack. "Memorize them by tonight," she said, then turned away, her shoes clicking down the hall. I stood there, the paper trembling in my hands, the words sinking into my gut like stones. My shift was 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., night duty with 2 other nurses and a security guard named Carl. The hospital was understaffed, its halls a maze of peeling paint and locked doors. Ward B, my assignment, was the low-security unit for stable patients, mostly sedated men and women with blank stares and heavy meds. My job was simple: rounds every 2 hours, check vitals, administer pills, chart everything. But the rules looped in my head, each one a splinter under my skin. Never look at the basement door. Do not let patient 17 touch you. I shoved the list into my scrubs pocket, telling myself it was nonsense, but my pulse wouldn't settle. The nurse's station was a cramped nook with a flickering computer monitor and a coffee machine that smelled burnt. Carl was there, a stocky guy in his 40s with a buzz cut and a bored expression, flipping through a car magazine. I introduced myself, my voice too bright, trying to shake off the scream I'd heard. He grunted, barely looking up. "Stick to the rules, kid," he said, his eyes on a glossy Mustang. I asked if he'd heard anything from the basement. He froze, then turned a page. Basements off limits. Rule 2. I didn't push. Instead, I grabbed my flashlight and started rounds. Ward B was a long hallway with 12 rooms, each with a small window in the door. The patients were quiet, their faces pale under the beam of my light, eyes either closed or staring at nothing. Room 4's patient, a middle-aged man with a shaved head, muttered something as I checked his chart, but it was gibberish, slurred by meds. The air was heavy, the kind of stillness that made every creak of the building sound like a footstep. I kept my ID badge clipped to my scrubs, Rule 4 nagging at me, though I didn't know why it mattered. At 12:15 a.m., I was in the med room, a closet-sized space with locked cabinets and a flickering overhead light. I was prepping a tray of pills, Haldol, Zyprexa, the usual, when the scream came again. Louder this time, closer, like it was right below the floor. It wasn't just a sound, it was a feeling, vibrating through my bones, making my hands shake so bad I spilled 3 capsules onto the counter. My breath caught, and I stared at the floor, half expecting something to burst through. I ran to the nurse's station, my sneakers slapping the linoleum. Carl was still there, unbothered, his magazine open to a new page. "You heard that, right?" I said, my voice high. He didn't look up. Basements off limits. But what was it? Rule 2, he said, sharper this time, his eyes flicking to mine for a second before dropping back to his magazine. I wanted to scream at him, demand answers, but the rules were a chain around my thoughts. I went back to the med room, my hands still trembling, and finished prepping the tray. The rest of the rounds were a blur, my flashlight beam jittery as I moved from room to room. Every shadow felt alive, every creak a warning. I kept checking my watch, willing the hours to pass. At 1:30 a.m., it happened. I was charting vitals at a desk in Ward B when the singing started. It was faint at first, a lilting melody drifting from the direction of Ward C, the high-security unit behind a steel door down the hall. The sound was beautiful in a way that made my skin crawl, like a lullaby sung in a language I didn't know. My stomach dropped as Rule 3 flashed in my mind: if you hear singing in Ward C, lock yourself in the nearest room and wait until it stops. I grabbed my clipboard and bolted for the nearest door, a supply closet across the hall. My hands fumbled with the lock, the key shaking as I turned it. Inside, I sank to the floor, my back against a box of gauze, the air thick with the smell of antiseptic. The singing grew louder, not one voice but many, overlapping in a chorus that felt wrong, like it was pulling at the edges of my mind. I hugged my knees, counting the seconds, my flashlight clutched like a lifeline. The melody twisted, turning sharp and discordant, voices rising and falling in waves. I thought of church choirs, of funerals, of things that shouldn't sing but did. It lasted 20 minutes, maybe more, until it stopped abruptly, leaving a silence that pressed against my ears. I waited another 5 minutes, my breath shallow, before unlocking the door. The hallway was empty, the air heavier now, like a storm was brewing inside the walls. Carl was gone from the nurse's station, his magazine left open on the desk, a coffee mug tipped over, spilling brown sludge across the pages. I called his name, my voice echoing, but no one answered. The clock read 2:45 a.m. I had rounds to finish, so I forced myself to move, gripping my flashlight tighter, the rules screaming in my head. As I passed a window in Ward B, I saw it, a shadow in the glass, tall and thin, moving like it was pacing behind me. Rule 5 burned through my fear: if you see a shadow move in the reflection of a window, do not turn around. My legs felt like concrete, but I kept walking, staring straight ahead, my reflection pale and wide-eyed in the glass. The shadow followed for 3 steps, its edges blurring like smoke, then vanished. My pulse pounded in my throat, and I didn't stop until I reached the end of the hall. At 3 a.m., Marjorie appeared at the nurse's station, her face gray under the flickering lights. She didn't ask about the scream, the singing, or Carl's absence. She just stared at me, her unblinking eyes like twin voids. "You followed the rules?" she asked, her voice cutting through the silence. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. She handed me a keycard, its edges worn smooth. "You're on Ward C tomorrow night," she said. "Read Rule 7 again." I drove home at dawn, the bayou swallowing the hospital in my rearview mirror. The rules were taped to my fridge when I got to my apartment, a one-bedroom rental that smelled of mildew and regret. I read them again, my eyes lingering on Rule 7, do not let patient 17 touch you under any circumstances. The words felt like a warning carved in bone. I didn't sleep that day. The scream from the basement echoed in my head, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw that shadow in the window, pacing just behind me. The air in St. Agnes Psychiatric Hospital felt thicker after the singing stopped, like the walls were holding their breath. I stood in the supply closet, my back pressed against a box of gauze, my flashlight casting a weak glow across shelves of syringes and bandages. The silence was worse than the chorus from Ward C, those overlapping voices that twisted into something not quite human. My watch read 2:05 a.m. My first night as a nurse in this rotting bayou hospital, and the rules Marjorie gave me were no longer a joke. They were a chain, each one tightening around my chest. I'm Claire Hensley, and I thought 6 years of nursing, our chaos, hospice grief, had hardened me. But St. Agnes was a different beast. The scream from the basement at 11:47 p.m. still rattled in my skull, and the shadow I'd seen in the window's reflection, tall, thin, pacing, had left my hands trembling. I'd followed Rule 3, locking myself in this closet when the singing started, and now I had to go back out there, finish my rounds in Ward B, and pretend I wasn't falling apart. The closet door creaked as I unlocked it, the sound too loud in the stillness. The hallway was empty, the fluorescent lights buzzing like a swarm of flies. Carl, the security guard, was still missing from the nurse's station, his magazine splayed open, coffee pooling on the desk. I called his name again, my voice thin, but the echo mocked me. The rules were taped to my clipboard, Rule 3 staring up at me: if you hear singing in Ward C, lock yourself in the nearest room and wait until it stops. I'd done that, but the memory of those voices, high, low, weaving together in a melody that felt like it was pulling at my thoughts, made my skin itch. I grabbed my flashlight and forced myself to move. Ward B's hallway stretched ahead, its linoleum scuffed and yellowed, the air heavy with bleach and that sour, spoiled milk smell. My job was to check vitals and deliver meds to the 12 patients in this low-security unit, all sedated, all stable. But stable didn't feel right. The patient in room 4, the one with the shaved head, had muttered something last round, his words slurred but sharp, like he was trying to warn me. I couldn't shake the feeling that the hospital was watching, waiting for me to slip. At 2:30 a.m., I reached room 6. The patient, a woman in her 50s with sunken cheeks and graying hair, was asleep, her breathing shallow under the thin blanket. I checked her pulse, steady, slow, and marked it on the chart. As I turned to leave, I heard it, a low hum, barely audible, coming from the direction of Ward C. My stomach twisted. The singing had stopped, hadn't it? I stood frozen, listening, but the hum faded, replaced by the drip of a leaky pipe somewhere in the walls. I told myself it was nothing, just my nerves fraying, but Rule 3 burned in my mind. I glanced at the steel door to Ward C, 50 feet down the hall, its keypad glowing faintly red. I wasn't cleared for that unit, not yet, but the hum felt like a lure, daring me to get closer. I moved to room 7, my flashlight beam jittery. The patient here was younger, maybe 30, his eyes open but unfocused, staring at the ceiling. His chart listed schizophrenia, heavy doses of Risperdal. I checked his vitals, my hands steadier now, but as I adjusted his 4, he grabbed my wrist. His grip was weak, but his fingers were cold, like they'd been dipped in ice. "Don't go near 17, he whispered, his voice a rasp. I yanked my hand back, heart pounding. Rule 7. Do not let patient 17 touch you under any circumstances. He wasn't patient 17, this was Ward B, not C, but his words sank into me like teeth. What do you mean? I asked, keeping my voice low. His eyes darted to the door, then back to the ceiling. They don't tell you. Nobody tells you. He sank back into the pillow, his lips moving silently, like he was praying. I backed out of the room, locking the door behind me, my ID badge heavy against my chest. Rule 4. Always carry your ID badge, even in the bathroom. I didn't know why it mattered, but I checked it was still clipped to my scrubs, the plastic warm from my body heat. The hallway felt longer now, the shadows deeper, pooling in corners where the light didn't reach. I kept moving, checking rooms, but the patient's words, "Don't go near 17, looped in my head, tangling with the scream, the singing, the shadow. At 3:15 a.m. I was back at the nurse's station, charting vitals with a pen that kept slipping in my sweaty grip. The coffee spill on Carl's magazine had dried, staining the pages brown. I called his name again, louder this time, but the hospital swallowed the sound. The rules were on my clipboard, and I read them again, my eyes snagging on Rule 5. If you see a shadow move in the reflection of a window, do not turn around. I'd seen it earlier, that tall shape pacing behind me in the glass, and I hadn't turned. But the memory made my skin crawl, like something was still there, just out of sight. The lights flickered once, then twice. I held my breath, waiting for a third, remembering Rule 8, if the lights flicker 3 times in a row, leave the room immediately. They steadied, and I exhaled, but the air felt wrong, heavier, like it was pressing against my lungs. I grabbed my flashlight and headed for the med room to prep the next round of pills. The hospital was quiet now, too quiet, the kind of silence that made you hear your own heartbeat. In the med room, I unlocked the cabinet, the keys jangling too loudly. I was reaching for a bottle of lorazepam when I heard it again, the hum from Ward C, louder this time, not singing but something close, like a chant. My hand froze, the bottle slipping from my fingers and hitting the counter with a clink. Rule 3. I scanned the room, but there was no lock on the med-room door, just a flimsy latch. The nearest lockable room was the supply closet, 30 feet down the hall. The hum grew, weaving through the walls, and I ran. I reached the closet, fumbling with the key, my hands slick with sweat. The hum was behind me now, closer, like it was coming from the hallway itself. I got the door open, slipped inside, and locked it, my breath ragged. The closet smelled of antiseptic and dust, the shelves pressing in around me. I sank to the floor, clutching my flashlight, and listened as the hum turned into voices, dozens, maybe hundreds, overlapping in a language I couldn't place. It wasn't singing anymore, it was a demand, pulling at my thoughts, urging me to open the door, to step out, to follow it toward C. I stayed there, curled up on the cold floor, until the voices stopped. My watch read 4:10 a.m. when the silence returned, sharp and heavy. I waited 10 more minutes, counting my breaths, before unlocking the door. The hallway was empty, but the air felt charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. I checked the nurse's station, still no Carl. His magazine was gone now, the desk clean, like he'd never been there. I finished my rounds, my movements mechanical, the rules a mantra in my head. At 5 a.m., another nurse, a quiet woman named Ellen, arrived for the tail end of the shift. She was younger than Marjorie, maybe 40, with dark circles under her eyes and a habit of chewing her nails. I asked if she'd seen Carl. She shook her head, her gaze flicking to the rules on my clipboard. "You followed them?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah," I said, my throat dry. She nodded, but her eyes didn't meet mine. "Good. Keep following them." At 6:45 a.m., Marjorie returned, her face as gray as the dawn outside. She didn't mention Carl or the singing. She just checked my charts, her fingers moving like she was counting sins. "You're back on Ward B tonight," she said. "But tomorrow, Ward C, memorize Rule 7. I drove home through the bayou, the cypress trees clawing at the sky. My apartment was a mess, unpacked boxes, a sink full of dishes, but I didn't care. I taped the rules to my fridge, next to the first copy, and read Rule 7 again: do not let patient 17 touch you under any circumstances. The words felt alive, like they were watching me. I didn't sleep. The hum from Ward C echoed in my ears, and when I closed my eyes, I saw the shadow in the window, waiting. The shadow in the window didn't just move. It followed me, its edges blurring like smoke as I walked past the glass in Ward B, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would crack my ribs. It was 3:30 a.m. on my first night at St. Agnes Psychiatric Hospital, and the rules taped to my clipboard were no longer a list, they were a cage. I'm Claire Hensley, a nurse who thought she'd seen it all in 6 years of ER and hospice work, but this crumbling hospital in the Louisiana bayou was unraveling me. The scream from the basement, the unholy singing from Ward C, Carl's disappearance, none of it made sense, but Rule 5 burned in my mind: if you see a shadow move in the reflection of a window, do not turn around. I didn't turn. I kept walking, my flashlight beam shaking, but I felt it behind me, pacing, waiting. The hospital's air was thick, heavy with the stench of bleach and that sour, curdled milk smell that clung to everything. Ward B's hallway stretched endlessly, its linoleum scuffed and peeling, the fluorescent lights buzzing like a chorus of dying insects. I just escaped the supply closet after the singing from Ward C. Those overlapping voices that clawed at my thoughts, when I saw the shadow. It was tall, too tall, its shape wrong, like a figure stretched thin by some unseen force. My sneakers squeaked as I forced myself forward, my eyes locked on the floor, refusing to glance back at the window. The shadow moved for 3 steps, maybe 4, then vanished, leaving my reflection alone in the glass, pale, wide-eyed, a stranger staring back. I reached the nurse's station, my hands trembling as I clutched my clipboard. Carl was still gone, his magazine missing, the coffee spill wiped clean like he'd never existed. The clock read 3:35 a.m., and I had to finish rounds, check vitals, pretend I wasn't falling apart. The rules were a mantra now, each one a lifeline: never look at the basement door. Do not let patient 17 touch you. If the lights flicker 3 times, leave the room. I checked my ID badge, Rule 4 nagging at me, its plastic edge digging into my chest. I didn't know why it mattered, but I wasn't about to test it. I moved to room 8, my flashlight cutting through the dimness. The patient, an older man with a scar across his cheek, was awake, sitting up in bed, his eyes glinting in the beam. His chart said bipolar disorder, heavy on lithium, but he didn't look sedated. He stared at me, unblinking, like he could see something I couldn't. "You saw it, didn't you?" he said, his voice low, gravelly. "In the glass." I froze, my pen hovering over the chart. "Saw what?" I asked, but my voice cracked, giving me away. He leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of the bed. "The thing that follows. It knows you're new." His lips curled into a half-smile, not kind, not cruel, just knowing. I backed out, locking the door faster than I meant to, my pulse racing. Rule 5 didn't say what the shadow was, but his words made it real, something more than a trick of the light. At 4 a.m., I was in the med room, prepping the last round of pills. The cabinets were locked, the keys cold in my hand, but every sound, the hum of the lights, the drip of that damn pipe, felt like a warning. I kept glancing at the door, expecting the hum from Ward C to start again, but it was quiet, too quiet. I was reaching for a vial of Ativan when the lights flickered once, then twice. I held my breath, Rule 8 screaming in my head: if the lights flicker 3 times in a row, leave the room immediately. I stared at the bulb, willing it to stay steady. It flickered a third time, and I bolted, leaving the vial on the counter, my sneakers slapping the linoleum as I ran for the hallway. I didn't stop until I reached the nurse's station, my chest heaving. The lights there were steady, but the air felt wrong, like it was pressing against my skin. I checked my watch. 4:15 a.m. Ellen, the other nurse, was there now, her nails bitten to the quick, her eyes darting to the shadows. I asked if she'd seen Carl. She shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. He's probably fine. Just follow the rules. Fine? I snapped, louder than I meant. He's gone, Ellen. His stuff's gone. What the hell's going on here? She flinched, glancing at the steel door to Ward C. Don't ask questions. Just do your job. Her words were sharp, but her hands were shaking, and I knew she was as scared as I was. I went back to rounds, my flashlight beam wobbling. Room 10's patient, a woman in her 20s with stringy hair, was muttering in her sleep, words I couldn't catch but that sounded like the hum from Ward C. I checked her vitals, my hands unsteady, and moved on. The hallway felt narrower now, the walls closer, like the hospital was shrinking around me. I passed another window, and my breath caught, but I didn't look at the glass. I couldn't. Not after the shadow. At 5:30 a.m., I was charting at the nurse's station when Marjorie appeared, her gray bun tight, her face like stone. She didn't ask about the singing, the shadow, or Carl. She just checked my charts, her fingers moving with mechanical precision. You followed the rules? She asked, her eyes boring into mine. I nodded, my throat dry. Yeah. She handed me a keycard, its edges worn smooth, like it had been used too many times. Ward C tomorrow night, she said. Read Rule 7 again. And Claire, she paused, her voice dropping. Don't talk about Carl. I drove home as the sky turned gray, the bayou a blur of cypress trees and fog. My apartment was a mess, but I didn't care. I taped a third copy of the rules to my fridge, next to the others, and read Rule 7, do not let patient 17 touch you under any circumstances. The words felt heavier now, like they were carved into the air. I didn't sleep. The shadow in the window followed me in my mind, its shape shifting behind my closed eyes, and the patient's words, "It knows you're new," rang like a warning I couldn't escape. The keycard burned in my pocket as I stood before the steel door to Ward C, its red keypad light pulsing like a heartbeat. It was 11:05 p.m. On my second night at St. Agnes Psychiatric Hospital. And the rules that had haunted me through my first shift, through the basement scream, the shadow in the window, the singing that locked me in a closet, felt like a noose tightening. I'm Claire Hensley, a nurse who thought 6 years of ER and hospice work had prepared me for anything, but this place, this rotting husk in the Louisiana bayou, was breaking me. The shadow from last night still lingered in my mind, tall and wrong, pacing behind me in the glass. And now, Marjorie's orders sent me to Ward C, the high-security unit, with Rule 7 screaming in my head, do not let patient 17 touch you under any circumstances. The hospital's air was heavier here, thick with the sour milk stench and something else, something metallic, like blood left to rust. I swiped the keycard, and the door buzzed, unlocking with a heavy clank that echoed down the hall. Ward B, where I'd spent last night dodging shadows and whispers, was quiet behind me, but Ward C was a different beast. The hallway beyond the door was narrower, the walls stained a sickly yellow, the fluorescent lights dimmer, casting long shadows that seemed to twitch. The air felt like breathing through a wet cloth, damp and oppressive, and every step I took echoed too loudly, like the hospital was listening. Ward C had 12 rooms, each with a reinforced window and a food slot, the kind you'd see in a prison. The patients here weren't stable like those in Ward B. Their charts listed diagnoses, schizoaffective disorder, severe paranoia, violent tendencies, but the details were sparse, almost deliberately vague. My job was the same, check vitals, administer meds, chart everything. But the rules felt sharper here, like they were written in blood. I gripped my flashlight, my ID badge clipped tightly to my scrubs. Rule 4, always carry your ID badge, even in the bathroom, and started rounds, my sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. Room 1's patient was a man in his 40s, his face gaunt, his eyes following me through the window as I checked his chart. He didn't speak, but his stare was heavy, like he was sizing me up. Room 2 was worse. A woman, maybe 60, pressed her face against the glass, her lips moving in a silent chant, her eyes wide and unblinking. I moved faster, my pulse climbing, but the hallway seemed to stretch, the doors multiplying. By room 5, I heard it, a low laugh, sharp and jagged, coming from inside. The patient, a young man with a shaved head, was sitting on his bed, grinning at nothing. His chart said, unspecified psychosis, but his smile said something else, something knowing, like he could see the shadow that had followed me last night. I reached room 17, and my stomach dropped. The door was identical to the others, but the number felt heavier, like it carried a curse. The window was dark, the room pitch black beyond the glass. I shone my flashlight, expecting to see a patient, but the beam caught nothing, just an empty bed, a bare mattress, and walls scratched with marks that looked too deliberate to be random. Rule 7 flashed in my mind, and I stepped back, my hand shaking as I marked the chart, patient absent. But the air around the door was wrong, colder, like standing near an open freezer. I moved on, my breath shallow, refusing to look back. At 12:30 a.m., I was in the med room, a cramped space just off Ward C's hallway, prepping pills under a flickering light. The cabinets were locked, the keys heavy in my hand, but every sound, the hum of the bulb, the distant drip of a pipe, felt like a warning. I was reaching for a vial of haloperidol when I heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the hallway. My heart stopped. I was alone in Ward C, Ellen was on Ward B, and Marjorie wasn't due until 3 a.m. I grabbed my flashlight and crept to the door, peering through the small window. The hallway was empty, but the footsteps continued, heavy, like boots on wet stone, getting closer, then stopping right outside. I held my breath, Rule 10 burning in my mind: if you hear your name called from an empty room, walk away and do not respond. The footsteps didn't return, but as I turned back to the counter, I heard it, my name, whispered, faint but clear, from the direction of room 17. Claire. It wasn't a question, it was a command, low and guttural, like the scream from the basement. I froze, my flashlight beam shaking, and forced myself to keep working, ignoring the voice, ignoring the way it seemed to crawl inside my skull. At 1:45 a.m., the lights flickered twice. I gripped the counter, waiting for the third, Rule 8 screaming: if the lights flicker 3 times in a row, leave the room immediately. They steadied, but the air grew colder, the metallic smell stronger. I finished prepping the meds and started rounds again, my hands unsteady as I slid trays through food slots. The patients were quieter now, but their eyes followed me, glinting in the dark like animals. Room 17 was still empty, but the scratches on the walls seemed deeper, fresher, like they'd been carved while I was in the med room. At 2:20 a.m., I was charting at a small desk in Ward C when the singing started again, not the hum from last night, but a single voice, high and clear, drifting from somewhere deeper in the ward. Rule 3, if you hear singing in Ward C, lock yourself in the nearest room and wait until it stops. I grabbed my clipboard and ran for the supply closet, the only lockable room nearby. The door slammed shut behind me, the lock clicking, and I sank to the floor, the air thick with antiseptic and dust. The singing grew louder, not a chorus this time, but one voice, piercing, like a child's but wrong, twisted. It wasn't coming from a room, it was in the walls, the ceiling, everywhere. I stayed there, my flashlight clutched to my chest, until the singing stopped at 2:50 a.m. When I emerged, the hallway was silent, but the air felt alive, charged, like the moment before a storm. I checked room 17 again, my flashlight trembling. The bed was still empty, but the scratches on the walls spelled something now, a word, maybe a name, too jagged to read. I backed away, my heart pounding, and finished rounds, my movements mechanical. At 3 a.m., Marjorie appeared at the Ward C desk, her gray bun tight, her eyes unblinking. She didn't ask about the singing or the footsteps. She just checked my charts, her fingers cold as they brushed the paper. "You followed the rules?" she asked, her voice cutting through the silence. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. She handed me a new keycard, this one scratched and bent. "You're back on Ward C tomorrow," she said. "Keep Rule 7 in your head. And Claire, don't go near room 17 unless you have to." I drove home at dawn, the bayou fog swallowing the hospital. My apartment was a mess, but I didn't care. I taped another copy of the rules to my fridge, Rule 7 staring at me, "Do not let patient 17 touch you under any circumstances." I didn't sleep. The whisper of my name echoed, and when I closed my eyes, I saw the scratches on room 17's walls, moving, forming shapes that weren't there. The whisper of my name from room 17 clung to me like damp rot as I stepped into Ward C for my third night at St. Agnes Psychiatric Hospital. It was 11:10 p.m., and the air was so thick it felt like swallowing mud, laced with that sour milk stench and a sharper, metallic tang that made my throat burn. I'm Claire Hensley, a nurse who thought ER bloodbaths and hospice farewells had steeled me, but this bayou hospital, its screams, shadows, and rules, was tearing me apart. Last night's footsteps, the singing, the scratches on room 17's walls, they weren't just oddities anymore. They were warnings, and Rule 7 was a blade at my throat: "Do not let patient 17 touch you under any circumstances." The steel door to Ward C buzzed as I swiped my keycard, the sound jarring in the silence. The hallway beyond was a tunnel of yellowed walls and flickering lights, the air heavy, like it was pressing me into the linoleum. My flashlight beam trembled as I started rounds, checking vitals and meds for the 12 patients in this high-security unit. Their eyes followed me through reinforced windows, unblinking, too bright, like they saw something I didn't. Room 1's patient, the gaunt man, muttered something as I passed, his voice a hiss, "It's waiting for you." I didn't stop, didn't ask. The rules were my anchor, but they were also my chains. Room 17 was halfway down the hall, its door looming like a gravestone. Last night, it was empty, the bed bare, the walls scratched with jagged marks that seemed to shift in the dark. I avoided looking at it as I worked, but my skin prickled, like the air itself was watching. At room 6, a woman with matted hair pressed her palms against the window, her nails clicking on the glass. Her chart said delusional disorder, but her eyes were clear, too clear, locked on mine. 17 knows your name, she whispered through the food slot. My stomach lurched, but I kept moving, Rule 10 echoing: "If you hear your name called from an empty room, walk away and do not respond." At 12:45 a.m., I was at the med room, prepping trays under a bulb that buzzed like a trapped wasp. The keys to the drug cabinet shook in my hand, every sound amplified, the drip of a pipe, the creak of the building, my own ragged breath. I was reaching for a vial of Seroquel when I heard it, a soft tap, like a finger on glass, coming from the hallway. My flashlight swept the door's small window, but the hall was empty, the red keypad light pulsing. Then it came again, tap, 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 slow, deliberate, from the direction of room 17. My heart slammed against my ribs, but I forced myself to keep working, Rule 7 pounding in my skull. I finished the tray and started rounds again, sliding meds through food slots. Room 10's patient, a man with a shaved head and a scar across his lips, grinned as I approached. "You're new," he said, his voice oily. "It likes new ones." I ignored him, but his words sank into me, heavy as the air. At room 17, I stopped, my flashlight beam shaking. The window was dark, the room still empty, or so I thought. As I slid the tray through the slot, a hand shot out, cold fingers brushing my wrist before I yanked back, my breath catching. The touch was brief, a graze, but it burned, like ice-searing skin. The slot slammed shut, and I stumbled back, my flashlight clattering to the floor. Rule 7. I'd broken it. My wrist throbbed, not with pain but with something else, a pulsing cold that spread up my arm. I grabbed my flashlight and ran to the med room, locking the door behind me, though it felt useless. My hands shook as I checked my wrist, red, raw, like a burn, but no mark. The cold was inside me now, crawling through my veins. I sank to the floor, the rules on my clipboard staring up at me. Do not let patient 17 touch you. I hadn't seen anyone in the room, but that hand, it was real, and it knew me. At 2 a.m., I forced myself back to rounds, my movements jerky, my flashlight beam darting to every shadow. The patients were quieter now, their eyes still following, but their stares felt heavier, like they knew what had happened. Room 17's window was dark, the slot closed, but the scratches on the walls were visible now, even from the hallway, a name, maybe mine, carved in jagged lines. I didn't stop to read it. The air around the door was colder, the metallic smell stronger, like blood pooling under the linoleum. At 3:15 a.m., I was charting at the Ward C desk when Ellen appeared, her nails chewed to stubs, her eyes hollow. "You okay?" she asked, but her voice was flat, like she already knew the answer. "Something touched me," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Room 17. Her face paled, and she glanced at the rules on my clipboard. "You didn't let it, did you?" I didn't answer. My wrist still pulsed, the cold spreading to my chest. She didn't press, just handed me a stack of old charts. "Read these. Stay away from 17. The charts were brittle, yellowed, some dated back decades. I flipped through them, my hands unsteady, and found a note tucked inside, a handwritten page, barely legible, from a nurse in 1993. It mentioned patient 17, not by name but by number, describing incidents in the basement, experiments gone wrong, a patient who wasn't just a patient. The last line was scratched out, but one word stood out, containment. At 4:30 a.m., the lights flickered 3 times. Rule 8, if the lights flicker 3 times in a row, leave the room immediately. I grabbed my clipboard and bolted for the supply closet, locking myself in. The air was thick, the antiseptic smell choking, and my wrist burned colder, like something was moving under my skin. I stayed there until 5 a.m., my flashlight clutched tight, the rules looping in my head. When I emerged, the hallway was silent, but the scratches on room 17's walls seemed to glow in the dim light, forming a pattern I couldn't unsee. Marjorie arrived at 6 a.m., her face gray, her eyes unblinking. She checked my charts, her fingers cold as they brushed the paper. "You followed the rules?" she asked, her voice sharp. I nodded, but my wrist pulsed, betraying me. She didn't ask about room 17, but her gaze lingered on my hand, like she could see the cold inside me. "Ward C again tomorrow," she said, handing me a new keycard, its edges sharper than the last. "Stay away from 17. I drove home through the fog, the bayou's cypress trees clawing at the sky. My apartment was a mess, dishes in the sink, boxes unpacked, but I didn't care. I taped another copy of the rules to my fridge, Rule 7 staring at me like an accusation. My wrist throbbed, the cold spreading, and when I closed my eyes, I saw the hand from room 17, its fingers long and pale, reaching for me in the dark. The cold from patient 17's touch lingered in my wrist, a pulsing ache that felt like something alive crawling under my skin, as I stepped into St. Agnes Psychiatric Hospital for my 3rd night. It was 11 p.m., and the Louisiana bayou outside was a black void, the hospital's gray brick walls swallowing the last of the moonlight. I'm Claire Hensley, a nurse who thought 6 years of ER and hospice had armored me against fear, but this place, its screams, shadows, and rules, was dismantling me. The hand that grazed me in Ward C last night, the scratches spelling my name, the old nurse's note about containment, they were puzzle pieces to a picture I didn't want to see. Rule 7 was a warning I'd failed: do not let patient 17 touch you under any circumstances. And now, the basement screams were calling me, pulling me toward Rule 2, do not enter the basement, no matter what you hear. Ward C's steel door buzzed as I swiped my keycard, the red keypad light flickering like a dying pulse. The hallway beyond was a tunnel of dim fluorescence and yellowed walls, the air thick with that sour milk stench and a metallic bite that made my throat tighten. My wrist throbbed, the cold spreading to my elbow, a constant reminder of the touch I couldn't shake. I gripped my flashlight, its beam unsteady, and started rounds, checking vitals and meds for the 12 patients in this high-security unit. Their eyes glinted through reinforced windows, watching, waiting, like they knew the cold inside me was more than a bruise. Room 3's patient, a woman with stringy hair and hollow cheeks, pressed her face to the glass as I passed, her breath fogging the window. "It's in you now," she whispered, her voice sharp, like she was spitting glass. I didn't stop, didn't answer, but her words sank into me, heavy as the air. Room 17 was next, and my stomach knotted. The window was dark, the bed empty, but the scratches on the walls seemed sharper tonight, the jagged lines forming a word, Claire, clearer than before. I backed away, my flashlight shaking, and moved on, Rule 7 a hammer in my skull. At 12:15 a.m. I was in the med room, prepping trays under a flickering bulb that buzzed like a trapped insect. The keys to the drug cabinet rattled in my hand, every sound amplified, the drip of a pipe, the creak of the floor, my own uneven breath. I was reaching for a vial of Zyprexa when I heard it, a scream, not from Ward C but from below, the basement, raw and guttural, like the one from my first night. It wasn't just sound, it was a pull, a hook in my chest, urging me toward the basement door at the end of the main hall. Rule 2 flashed, do not enter the basement, no matter what you hear. But the scream came again, louder, and I swear it said my name. I ran to the nurse's station, my sneakers slapping the linoleum. Ellen was there, her nails bitten to stubs, her eyes darting to the shadows. "You heard that?" I asked, my voice high. She nodded, her face pale. "Basement. Ignore it. Rule 2. "But I stopped, the word calling stuck in my throat. She didn't answer, just handed me a stack of charts and turned away, like she was afraid to say more. I went back to rounds, but the scream echoed, joined by new sounds, scratching, like nails on stone, and a low whisper that wasn't words but felt like them. At room 9, the patient, a man with a scar across his forehead, was awake, staring at the ceiling. "It wants you down there," he said, his voice flat, like he was stating the weather. I locked his door and moved on, my wrist pulsing colder, like the touch was waking up. At 1:30 a.m., I was charting when I noticed the basement door. It was at the end of the main hall, visible from Ward C's entrance, a heavy steel slab with a rusted handle. I'd never looked at it directly, mindful of Rule 1, never look at the basement door between midnight and 3 a.m. But the screams were louder now, overlapping, not one voice but many, and the door seemed to pulse, like it was breathing. I turned away, my eyes burning, but the pull was stronger, a tug in my chest that matched the cold in my wrist. At 2 a.m. I was back in the med room when I heard footsteps, slow, heavy, coming from the main hall. My flashlight swept the door's window, but the hall was empty. Then I saw it, Carl's magazine, the one he'd been reading my first night, lying on the floor outside the basement door, its pages open, coffee-stained. Carl was still gone, vanished since that first night, and now his magazine was there, like a breadcrumb. I stepped into the hall, my heart pounding, and saw the basement door was ajar, just a crack, a sliver of black beyond. Rule 2 screamed, but the screams from below were louder, and my feet moved before I could stop them. I stopped 5 feet from the door, my flashlight beam shaking. The air was colder here, the metallic smell overwhelming, like blood and rust. The screams stopped, replaced by a whisper, my name, over and over, from the darkness beyond the door. I backed away, Rule 2 a lifeline, and ran to the supply closet, locking myself in. The whispers followed, seeping through the walls, and my wrist burned, the cold spreading to my shoulder, like something was clawing its way up my arm. At 3:45 a.m., Marjorie appeared at the Ward C desk, her face gray, her eyes like voids. She didn't ask about the screams or the magazine. She checked my charts, her fingers brushing the paper like ice. "You followed the rules?" she asked, her voice sharp. I nodded, but my wrist throbbed, and I hid it behind my back. "What's in the basement?" I asked, the words slipping out. Her eyes narrowed. "Don't ask about the basement. Rule 2. She paused, her voice dropping. "A nurse went down there in '98. Broke the rules. She didn't come back. I drove home at dawn, the bayou fog choking the road. My apartment was a mess, but I didn't care. I taped another copy of the rules to my fridge, Rule 2 staring at me, do not enter the basement, no matter what you hear." My wrist pulsed, the cold in my chest now, and when I closed my eyes, I saw the basement door, ajar, and something moving in the dark, whispering my name. The basement door's whisper, my name, over and over, low and guttural, followed me into my fourth night at St. Agnes Psychiatric Hospital, clawing at my thoughts like the cold pulsing in my wrist from patient 17's touch. It was 11:02 p.m., and the Louisiana bayou outside was a black void, the hospital's moss-stained walls swallowing the last scraps of light. I'm Claire Hensley, a nurse who thought 6 years of ER and hospice had burned fear out of me, but this place, its screams, shadows, and rules, was unraveling my nerves. The basement's pull last night, Carl's magazine by the ajar door, Marjorie's warning about a nurse who never came back, it was all too much, and yet I was back in Ward C, the keycard trembling in my hand, Rule 7 a blade in my chest, do not let patient 17 touch you under any circumstances. I'd already failed that one, and now Rule 1 loomed. Never look directly at the basement door between midnight and 3 a.m. The steel door to Ward C buzzed as I swiped my keycard, the red keypad light flickering like a dying ember. The hallway was a tunnel of flickering fluorescence and yellowed walls, the air thick with sour milk rot and that metallic tang that made my throat burn. My wrist throbbed, the cold spreading to my shoulder, a constant reminder of the hand that grazed me in room 17. I gripped my flashlight, its beam unsteady, and started rounds, checking vitals and meds for the 12 patients in this high-security unit. Their eyes glinted through reinforced windows, unblinking, like they could see the cold inside me, like they knew I was marked. Room 2's patient, a woman with matted hair, pressed her palms to the glass, her nails clicking. "You're breaking," she whispered, her voice a blade. I didn't answer, but her words hit too close, my wrist pulsing colder. Room 17 was next, and my stomach knotted. The window was dark, the bed empty, but the scratches on the walls, Claire, carved in jagged lines, seemed to pulse, like they were alive. I moved past, my flashlight shaking, refusing to linger, but the air around the door was freezing, the metallic smell so strong it made my eyes water. At 12:10 a.m., I was in the med room, prepping trays under a bulb that buzzed like a swarm of wasps. The keys rattled in my hand, every sound a jolt, the drip of a pipe, the creak of the floor, my own ragged breath. I was reaching for a vial of Risperdal when the scream came again, raw and guttural, from the basement. It wasn't just a sound, it was a hook, tugging at my chest, whispering my name. Rule 2, do not enter the basement, no matter what you hear. But it was louder tonight, joined by scratching, like claws on stone, and a low chant that wasn't words but felt like them, pulling me toward the main hall. I tried to focus, but the basement's call was relentless, and Rule 1 gnawed at me, never look directly at the basement door between midnight and 3 a.m. I'd followed it last night, turning away from the ajar door, Carl's magazine a haunting lure. But tonight, my fear was cracking, replaced by a need to know, to understand why the hospital felt alive, why my wrist burned with cold. I left the med room, my flashlight beam darting, and moved toward the main hall, the basement door at its end. It was 12:45 a.m., and I stood 10 feet away, the steel slab rusted, its handle glinting in the dim light. The scream stopped, and the silence was worse, heavy, like the air was holding its breath. I knew the rule, but my eyes betrayed me, locking onto the door. A shape moved behind it, indistinct, tall, its edges blurring like smoke. My breath caught, Rule 1 screaming, but I couldn't look away. The lights flickered, once, twice, 3 times. Rule 8, if the lights flicker 3 times in a row, leave the room immediately. But I wasn't in a room, I was in the hall, and the lights went out, plunging the hospital into darkness. I ran, my flashlight beam bouncing, my sneakers slipping on the linoleum. The shape moved again, a shadow in the corner of my eye, not in the door but behind me, pacing, like the one in the window my first night. I reached the supply closet in Ward C, fumbled the lock, and slammed the door shut, my chest heaving. The air was thick with antiseptic and dust, my wrist burning colder, the cold now in my chest, like something was clawing its way out. I stayed there, curled on the floor, until the lights hummed back on at 1:20 a.m. When I emerged, the hallway was empty, but my head throbbed, a dull ache that pulsed with my wrist. My skin felt too tight, my vision blurry, like I'd been staring into fog. I finished rounds, my movements mechanical, the patient's eyes following me, their whispers sharper now. You looked. It saw you. Room 17's scratches were clearer, the word Claire joined by others, come, below, carved in lines that seemed to bleed. At 3 a.m., Ellen appeared at the Ward C desk, her nails gone, her fingers raw. She didn't look at me, just checked my charts. You're sick, she said, her voice flat. Go home after your shift. I'm fine, I lied, but my head pounded, and my wrist felt like ice. She glanced at the basement door, then back at me. You looked, didn't you? I didn't answer, but my silence was enough. She shook her head, her eyes hollow. Don't do it again. Marjorie arrived at 5:45 a.m., her face gray, her bun tighter than ever. She didn't ask about the screams or my shaking hands. She checked my charts, her fingers cold as they brushed the paper. You followed the rules? She asked, her eyes boring into mine. I nodded, but my headache flared, and I hid my wrist behind my back. She didn't press, just handed me a new keycard, its edges jagged. Ward C again tomorrow, she said. Stay away from the basement. And Claire, don't look at the door. I drove home through the fog, the bayou's cypress trees skeletal in the dawn. My apartment was a mess, but I didn't care. I taped another copy of the rules to my fridge, Rule 1 staring at me, never look directly at the basement door between midnight and 3 a.m. My wrist pulsed, my head throbbed, and when I closed my eyes, I saw the shape behind the door, moving, waiting, whispering my name. The headache that started when I looked at the basement door pulsed like a second heartbeat, sinking with the cold crawling from my wrist to my chest, as I entered St. Agnes Psychiatric Hospital for my 5th night. It was 11 p.m., and the Louisiana bayou outside was a black void, the hospital's moss-stained walls swallowing the last of the moonlight. I'm Claire Hensley, a nurse who thought 6 years of ER and hospice had burned fear out of me, but this place, its screams, shadows, and rules, was shredding my sanity. Breaking Rule 1 last night, staring at that door, seeing that blurred shape, had left me sick, my vision foggy, my skin too tight, like something was growing inside me. Rule 7 haunted me. Do not let patient 17 touch you under any circumstances. I'd failed that, and now the basement's whispers, the scratches spelling my name, and the old nurse's note about containment were pieces of a truth I was terrified to uncover. Ward C's steel door buzzed as I swiped my keycard, the red keypad light flickering like a wound. The hallway beyond was a tunnel of dim fluorescence and yellowed walls, the air thick with sour milk rot and a metallic bite that made my throat burn. My wrist throbbed, the cold now a weight in my chest, like ice pressing against my lungs. I gripped my flashlight, its beam unsteady, and started rounds, checking vitals and meds for the 12 patients in this high-security unit. Their eyes glinted through reinforced windows, unblinking, predatory, like they could smell the cold inside me, like they knew I'd broken a rule. Room 4's patient, a man with a shaved head and a scar across his lips, grinned as I passed, his teeth glinting. "You're marked now," he whispered through the food slot, his voice oily. "17's got you." I didn't answer, but my headache flared, and I hurried past, my sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. Room 17 was next, its window dark, the bed empty, but the scratches on the walls, "Claire, come," below, were deeper, wet, like they'd been carved with something sharp and alive. The air around the door was freezing, the metallic smell so strong it made my eyes water. I backed away, Rule 7 a scream in my skull. At 12:20 a.m., I was in the medroom, prepping trays under a bulb that buzzed like a dying fly. The keys rattled in my hand, every sound a jolt, the drip of a pipe, the creak of the floor, my own uneven breath. My vision blurred, the edges of the room softening, like I was underwater. I was reaching for a vial of haloperidol when I noticed a loose panel in the cabinet, slightly ajar. Behind it was a notebook, its cover cracked leather, the pages yellowed and brittle. My hands shook as I opened it, the handwriting cramped, dated 1993, from a nurse named Evelyn. It detailed Ward C, Patient 17, and the basement, experiments in the 80s, something about binding a patient to contain something else, something not human. The last entry read, "It's not 17. It's what's inside 17. Don't let it touch you." The word containment was underlined, smeared with what looked like blood. My headache spiked, my wrist burning colder, and I stuffed the notebook back, my breath hitching. The screams from the basement came again, louder, not one voice but many, chanting my name, "Claire, Claire, Claire," like a summons. Rule 2, do not enter the basement, no matter what you hear. But the notebook's words were a hook, pulling me toward the truth. I left the med-room, my flashlight beam darting, and moved toward the main hall, the basement door at its end. It was 1:15 a.m., and I stopped 10 feet away, mindful of Rule 1. Never look directly at the basement door between midnight and 3 a.m. The door was shut, but the air around it was wrong, cold, pulsing, like it was alive. The scream stopped, replaced by a scratching sound, like claws on metal, coming from inside the door. My vision blurred again, my head pounding so hard I thought my skull would split. I turned away, but the cold in my chest tightened, and I heard it, my name, whispered, not from the basement but from Ward C, from room 17. I ran back, my flashlight shaking, and stopped at the door. The scratches were moving, rearranging, forming new words, "You are ours." My knees buckled, but I didn't look away, not this time. At 2:30 a.m., the lights flickered 3 times. Rule 8, if the lights flicker 3 times in a row, leave the room immediately. I bolted for the supply closet, locking myself in, the air thick with antiseptic and dust. My wrist burned, the cold in my chest like a fist, and my headache was a storm, my vision swimming. I stayed there, curled on the floor, until the light steadied at 3 a.m. When I emerged, the hallway was silent, but the patient's eyes were sharper, their whispers louder, "You're part of it now." Room 17's window was still dark, but the scratches were gone, the walls smooth, like they'd never been there. At 4 a.m., Ellen appeared at the Ward C desk, her fingers raw, her eyes hollow. "You're sick," she said, her voice flat. "You looked again, didn't you?" I didn't answer, my headache throbbing. She handed me a bottle of water, but I remembered Rule 9, do not eat or drink anything left unattended in the break room. "It's clean," she said, but her eyes didn't meet mine, and I set it down. Marjorie arrived at 5:30 a.m., her face gray, her bun tight. She didn't ask about the notebook or the screams. She checked my charts, her fingers cold as ice. "You followed the rules?" she asked, her eyes boring into mine. I nodded, but my wrist pulsed, my head pounded, and I hid my hands behind my back. "What's patient 17? I asked, the words slipping out. Her face hardened. "Don't ask about 17. Just follow the rules." She handed me a new keycard, its edges sharp enough to cut. "Ward C again tomorrow. Stay away from the basement." I drove home through the fog, the bayou's cypress trees clawing at the sky. My apartment was a mess, dishes, boxes, chaos, but I didn't care. I taped another copy of the rules to my fridge, Rule 7 staring at me: "Do not let patient 17 touch you under any circumstances." My wrist throbbed, my headache a relentless drum, and when I closed my eyes, I saw the notebook's words: "It's not 17. It's what's inside 17, and the basement door, waiting, whispering my name." The hospital's walls seemed to pulse with my heartbeat as I stepped into St. Agnes for my 6th night, the cold from patient 17's touch now a fist in my chest, squeezing my lungs with every breath. It was 11 p.m., and the Louisiana bayou outside was a black void, the hospital's moss-stained bricks swallowing the night. I'm Claire Hensley, a nurse who thought 6 years of ER and hospice had taught me to face fear, but St. Agnes, it screams, shadows, and rules, was a living thing, and it had me in its grip. The headache from breaking Rule 1, the notebook revealing patient 17 as a vessel for something not human, the scratches spelling "You are ours," they were chains pulling me deeper. Rule 7 was a scar: "Do not let patient 17 touch you under any circumstances." I'd failed, and now the basement's whispers were louder, calling me to break Rule 2, "Do not enter the basement, no matter what you hear." Ward C's steel door buzzed as I swiped my keycard, the red keypad light flickering like a dying star. The hallway beyond was a tunnel of dim fluorescence and yellowed walls, the air thick with sour milk rot and a metallic tang that coated my tongue. My wrist throbbed, the cold spreading to my throat, making every swallow ache. My vision was foggy, edges blurring like I was seeing through dirty glass, and my headache was a constant drum, pounding in time with my pulse. I gripped my flashlight, its beam shaking, and started rounds, checking vitals and meds for the 12 patients in this high-security unit. Their eyes glinted through reinforced windows, not just watching but knowing, like they could see the cold inside me, like they felt the hospital's grip too. Room 5's patient, a woman with hollow cheeks and claw-like nails, pressed her face to the glass, her breath fogging it. "It's got you now," she hissed, her voice sharp, like breaking bone. "You can't leave." Her words hit like a punch, my headache flaring, and I hurried past, my sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. Room 17 was next, its window dark, the bed empty, but the walls were smooth now, the scratches gone, like the hospital had erased them. The air around the door was freezing, the metallic smell so strong it made my eyes water. I didn't linger, but my chest tightened, the cold pulsing harder, like something was waking up inside me. At 12:30 a.m. I was in the med room, prepping trays under a bulb that buzzed like a swarm of flies. The keys rattled in my hand, every sound a jolt, the drip of a pipe, the creak of the floor, my own ragged breath. My vision blurred worse, the vials swimming in front of me. I was reaching for a bottle of lorazepam when the singing started again, not from Ward C but everywhere, walls, ceiling, floor, a single voice, high and sharp, like a child's but twisted, singing my name in a melody that made my skin crawl. Rule 3, if you hear singing in Ward C, lock yourself in the nearest room and wait until it stops. But this wasn't just Ward C, it was the hospital, and the nearest lockable room was the supply closet, 30 feet down the hall. I ran, my flashlight beam bouncing, the singing growing louder, more voices joining, a chorus that wasn't human, pulling at my thoughts. I reached the closet, fumbled the lock, and slammed the door shut, sinking to the floor. The air was thick with antiseptic and dust, my chest heaving, the cold inside me like a blade. The singing didn't stop, it got closer, seeping through the walls, my name woven into the melody, Claire, come, Claire, below. My headache roared, my vision swimming, and I clutched my flashlight, willing it to stop. It lasted 20 minutes, maybe more, until the silence returned, sharp and heavy, like a guillotine. When I emerged at 1:15 a.m., the hallway was empty, but the air felt alive, charged, like the hospital was breathing. I tried to finish rounds, but my legs were lead, my vision so blurry I could barely read the charts. At room 8, the patient, a man with a scar across his forehead, was awake, staring at me through the window. "You can't leave," he said, his voice flat, like he was reading my fate. "It won't let you." I backed away, my wrist burning, and headed for the main hall, desperate for air, for escape. At 2 a.m., I reached the hospital's front door, the one I'd entered 5 nights ago. I swiped my keycard, but the lock buzzed red, unyielding. I tried again, then the side exit, then the emergency door, all locked, all red. The singing started again, louder, coming from everywhere, and I ran to the nurse's station, my chest tight, my vision fading. Ellen was there, her fingers bloody from chewing, her eyes hollow. "You can't leave," she said, echoing the patient. "Not now." "What's happening to me?" I asked, my voice breaking, my wrist pulsing like a second heart. She didn't answer, just handed me a stack of charts. "Do your job. Follow the rules." But her hands shook, and I saw it in her eyes, she was trapped too, part of the hospital's grip. At 3:30 a.m., I was charting when the lights flickered 3 times. Rule 8, if the lights flicker 3 times in a row, leave the room immediately. I bolted for the supply closet again, locking myself in, my headache a storm, my vision nearly gone. The singing followed, louder, the voices not just in the walls but in my head, chanting Claire, below, ours. My wrist burned, the cold in my chest like a hand, squeezing, pulling. I stayed there until 4:15 a.m. My flashlight clutched tight, my body shaking. When I emerged, the patients were silent, their eyes sharper, like they were waiting. Room 17's window was dark, but the air around it was colder, the metallic smell choking. I finished rounds, my movements mechanical, the rules a mantra I couldn't escape. At 5:45 a.m., Marjorie appeared, her face gray, her eyes unblinking. She checked my charts, her fingers cold as ice. "You followed the rules?" she asked, her voice sharp. I nodded, but my headache roared, my vision a blur, and I hid my wrist behind my back. "What's happening to me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Her eyes narrowed. "Don't ask questions. Just follow the rules." She handed me a new keycard, its edges jagged. "Ward C again tomorrow. Stay away from the basement, Claire. And don't try to leave." I drove home through the fog, the bayou's cypress trees clawing at the sky. My apartment was a mess, dishes, boxes, chaos, but I didn't care. I taped another copy of the rules to my fridge. Rule 3 staring at me, if you hear singing in Ward C, lock yourself in the nearest room and wait until it stops. My wrist throbbed, my headache a relentless drum, and when I closed my eyes, I heard the singing, felt the hospital's grip, saw the basement door, waiting, whispering my name. The hospital's grip tightened around my chest, the cold from patient 17's touch now a claw in my lungs, as I stepped into St. Agnes Psychiatric Hospital for my 7th night. It was 11 p.m., and the Louisiana bayou outside was a black void, the hospital's moss-stained walls swallowing the last of the moonlight. I'm Claire Hensley, a nurse who thought 6 years of ER and hospice had burned fear out of me, but this place, its screams, shadows, and rules, was a living thing, and it owned me. The locked doors last night, the singing that followed me everywhere, the notebook revealing patient 17 as a vessel for something not human. They were chains pulling me toward the basement, despite Rule 2. Do not enter the basement, no matter what you hear. My wrist throbbed, my headache a relentless storm, and my vision blurred, like I was seeing through a veil, as Rule 7 haunted me: do not let patient 17 touch you under any circumstances. I'd failed, and now the hospital wouldn't let me go. Ward C's steel door buzzed as I swiped my keycard, the red keypad light pulsing like a wound. The hallway beyond was a tunnel of dim fluorescence and yellowed walls, the air thick with sour milk rot and a metallic tang that made my throat burn. My wrist burned colder, the cold now in my throat, my chest, my bones, like something was growing inside me. I gripped my flashlight, its beam shaking, and started rounds, checking vitals and meds for the 12 patients in this high-security unit. Their eyes glinted through reinforced windows, not just watching but waiting, like they knew the hospital had claimed me. Room SXS patient, a woman with claw-like nails, pressed her face to the glass, her breath fogging it. "You're not you anymore," she whispered, her voice a knife. My headache flared, my vision swimming, and I hurried past, my sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. Room 17 was next, its window dark, the bed empty, but the walls were alive again, scratches forming words: Claire, below, ours, pulsing like veins. The air around the door was freezing, the metallic smell choking, and I backed away, my chest tight, the cold inside me clawing. At 12:45 a.m., I was in the med room, prepping trays under a bulb that buzzed like a dying wasp. My vision was nearly gone, the vials blurring into smudges, my hands shaking so bad I dropped a bottle of Seroquel, the pills scattering like teeth. The screams came again, not from Ward C but from below, the basement, raw and guttural, chanting my name: Claire, come, Claire, below. Rule 2 screamed, but the pull was stronger, a hook in my chest, dragging me toward the main hall. I stumbled out, my flashlight beam darting, and saw the basement door. Its steel slab ajar, a sliver of black beyond. The air was cold, the metallic smell overwhelming, like blood and rust. I stopped 10 feet away, Rule 1 burning: never look directly at the basement door between midnight and 3 a.m. But I'd broken that rule, and now my body wasn't mine, my feet moving closer, the screams louder, my name a chorus. At 1:30 a.m., the door creaked wider, and I saw it, a figure, tall, thin, its edges blurring like smoke, but its face was wrong, a twisted mirror of patient 17, the man I'd never seen but felt in room 17's empty bed. Its eyes were black voids, its mouth a slash, and it spoke my name, not a whisper but a command, vibrating through my bones. I ran, my flashlight falling, my sneakers slipping, but the hospital shifted, the hallway stretching, the doors multiplying. The singing started again, everywhere, walls, ceiling, floor, a chorus of voices, not human, chanting Claire, ours, below. I reached the supply closet, but the lock wouldn't turn, the keycard dead. My wrist burned, the cold in my chest a fist, my headache splitting my skull. The figure was behind me now, its shadow in every window, pacing, waiting. I stumbled to the basement door, no longer running from it but toward it, the pull too strong, the rules broken. The door opened, and I stepped inside, the darkness swallowing me. The air was ice, the metallic smell choking, and the stairs descended into a void. The figure was there, not behind but ahead, its face shifting, patient 17, but not, its features melting into something older, something wrong. It reached for me, its hand the same that touched me in room 17, and I screamed, but the sound was lost in the chant: Claire, ours, below. My vision faded, my body not mine, and I fell, the cold consuming me. I woke in my car at dawn, the hospital gone from my rearview mirror, the bayou fog thick. My wrist was raw, my headache a dull ache, but I was alive. I drove home, my apartment a mess, dishes, boxes, chaos, but I didn't care. I quit that day, emailing Marjorie, burning the keycard. But the cold lingered, a weight in my chest, and at night, miles from St. Agnes, I heard it, the singing, faint but clear, my name woven into the melody. I taped a new list to my fridge, not the hospital's rules but my own, written in shaking hands: never sleep with the lights off. Never look in mirrors after midnight. Never answer the whispers. The last line stared back at me, a truth I couldn't escape: it followed you home.